Meat and potatoes. Not just a deep dive. It's the deepest dive into Minnesota Vikings football.
That's right, Purple Daily Meat and Potatoes, which means it's Judd, it's Forno, it's AJ. Plenty to get to break down off the film, especially the Vikings offense of the game on Sunday against Detroit. But speaking of meat and potatoes, that gives me a perfect opportunity to talk about a place where you can get some fantastic food, and that, of course, is at our friends, The Butcher and the Boar, located in Minneapolis's North Loop, gathering space for Southern-style hospitality. Great for both family and business gatherings. High-end cuisine with a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Happy hour every day, 4 to 6 p.m. A brunch on weekends that's absolutely delicious. Signature sausages from their smokehouse, absolutely outstanding. So check them out, perhaps before a Wolves game, perhaps before a Twins game come springtime. Butcher and the Boar in the North Loop in Minneapolis. Forno, welcome back. It's been a few weeks. The holidays are done. We can get back to regular programming. Thank God.
Hey, I just got to say, Judd, it's been 3 weeks and your hair looks very nice. I like the new hairstyle.
Thanks. I have to get a cut, and so
don't get a cut
in the morning.
Take it from AJ and I. Just don't get a cut. Just let it go.
You guys are the hair on the show. I can't be three people trying to claim that mantle. We got two. That's enough.
Judd. Hey, have you ever heard of the band ZZ Top? Of course you have. Just grow the mullet. You love hockey. It's perfect.
I had the mullet.
Get it again.
You weren't born yet.
Awesome.
Late 80s. I had a mullet.
I was born in the late 80s.
Okay. Well, I
was only alive for 24 days in the 80s, but I was born in the 80s.
Exactly right. Okay, well, when you were a baby, when you were first born, I had a mullet. And by the way, at the time, the mullet, never questioned, very stylish. Now I feel like it's a retro sort of laughed at thing.
They have mullet competitions, Judd. We should enter you in one.
They called it,
sponsor you.
In my day, they called it hockey hair. The mullet hadn't been coined yet. It was called hockey hair.
It's perfect for you, Judd.
The growing right down there. It was a good head of hair. Those days are gone now, unfortunately. Also, unfortunately, what's gone is the Vikings 9-game win streak. Now, speaking of segues, let's talk about it. Lions, Vikings, we all expected a really good, close game. We didn't get that. It's not that the Vikings didn't have chances offensively. Mm-hmm. Like I'm sure as you went back and watched the All-22, just as we saw watching the game live, that was a game the Vikings could have won. Like don't let the score fool you. That was not a blowout where it's like the Vikings didn't have a chance. Talk to me about what you saw from the film, though, offensively, starting with Darnold's play at quarterback and then extending outward.
I think before we kind of really dive into it, honestly, hats off to Aaron Glenn and that defense. They devised a tremendous game plan. They worked it to perfection. They overcame a lot of injuries, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that. They deserve to win the game, but they did not beat the Vikings nearly as badly as it may have been perceived. Some analysts have said, hey, a few bounces here and there go the Vikings' way. Listen, no bounces went the Vikings' way. None. Maybe the Metellus tip and Ivan Pace's interception, but Pace trips instead of just bulldozing his way into the end zone. Nuanced things. Cam Akers not being able to finish that 57-yard run. Yes. Those things all ended up mattering because guess what? 0-4 in the red zone, just 3 points on red zone trips. You can't do that and expect to be successful in this league, especially against a great football team. And everybody's heard the old adage, the NFL is a game of inches. Well, guess what? 6 inches on 3 plays, the Vikings have 22 points, and all of a sudden it's a tie football game. That is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a team that had good play design, that had guys wide open, but Sam Darnold, for whatever reason, was not hitting them. And that's why if we want to talk about, I know you guys do on Purple Daily, I didn't listen to the Pie Chart of Blame episode, but if you're going to do a Pie Chart of Blame, I think 70%'s got to go to Sam Darnold. He was uncharacteristic in his play in this game. And I saw a bunch of former players on social media talking about it, and he was pressing. You could just tell he was too hyped, too amped up. Whenever you have that kind of adrenaline, you make mistakes. I've done it. You guys have done it. We've all done it. We're just way too excited. Oh my gosh, bases loaded in like coach pitch back when we're 8 years old. I just want to hit that ball out of the park, and you strike out. Like it's those kind of things, and those conceptual ideas translate even at the professional level. This was a humongous game, and everything was just off from the start. He was just making correct reads, like that seam ball to TJ Hawkinson. That ball is 6 inches closer to Hawkinson. That's a catch for 20 plus yards on 3rd and 18 and a first down. Those kind of plays are big momentum swings. Because go ahead.
I was going to say, so tell me how that maybe changes, because I think a lot of people, Vikings fans, are sitting with this like unrest of how do we look past that and not expect the same Sam Darnold come Monday night against the Rams. What does this offense need to do? What does he need to do to kind of switch that around and maybe find what we saw over that 9-game win streak? Because if there's another performance like we saw on Sunday night, I think it's going to be a pretty short stint in the playoffs.
Throw it away and just take a deep breath. Play within yourself. Play your game. One of my favorite series of all time is The Mighty Ducks. Everybody's seen The Mighty Ducks 1. D2 was fantastic, but D3 might be my favorite because it was just such a different style of movie. And I'll always remember Coach O'Ryan talking to Charlie Conway about you have to make him make the first move. You have to play smart, and you have to play within yourself. And if you do that, great things can happen. Like that's kind of the conceptual idea of teaching him the ways of how to play defense. So with Darnold, don't force it. Don't panic. Just play your game. You play your game. You can do what you did against the Green Bay Packers, against the Atlanta Falcons. We've seen it. He has had 13 great games as a Minnesota Viking. Some of them are better than others, but he had 13 games, only the second quarterback ever to have 13 games with a passer rating over 100 in a single season. That's not by accident. We're asking a player to just do what he can do and do what he's already shown. He just needs to play within himself. Don't panic.
The challenge, but here's the problem, and the Lions expose this, and this is going to become a playoff trend. Part of the reason why, so like it would have made sense if the adrenaline was huge coming out, right? But ordinarily you calm back down. But here's what Glenn did. Sam Darnold from here on out is going to get his ass kicked. And his problem is he holds the ball. So what they're going to literally have to do is either rethink the passing game. If he waits for routes to develop, he is going to be destroyed because that's how the playoffs work. It goes back to Brett Favre against the Saints. And look, that's Brett Favre, and he adjusted. He took the beating. But the real question here is Sam prepared to take the beating and stand in there and not panic? Because, like, I agree with you, Forno. At the beginning of the game, amped up. Happens. Gonna happen. But he's a professional athlete. You can calm that down. What you can't calm down is the fact that we have now gone to a stage of the season where teams want to rip your head off. So what do they do to combat that? That's the most important thing starting Monday night, because the secret is he holds the ball. And as you've said too, the problem with this is we can crucify the offensive line all we want. They should block this guy. You got to block him. You got to block him. But you've gone through it before. There's a certain amount of time the guys can block, and then that time is done. And the quarterback gets hit, and we're all like, offensive line sucks. Well, no, that's not fair. The quarterback held the ball. So, like, there are some interesting adjustments that I think Kevin O'Connell is going to have to make to accommodate Sam to have success. Otherwise, you're going to run into the same problem again from a schematic standpoint.
So I agree and disagree with you on that main conceptual point where Sam Darnold's just going to get beaten up. When hasn't he gotten beaten up? He's gotten beaten up all year. And I don't think there was a ton different against the Lions.
Oh, I do.
But I will say their conceptual strategy that the Lions used is going to be different than what a lot of teams are going to use. And one of the reasons why is their lack of personnel. They don't have a guy who can beat you around the bend. They don't have a guy right now who can take on a tackle and just bend the corner. They can't do that. So what did they do? They pushed the pocket. They pushed it inward. And one of the things that Darnold's been so great at is, like, if you have a guy like Jonathan Grenard, who just bends the corner around the tackle. Well, guess what's going to open up? That B gap. So then you just slither on into the B gap with that little shimmy, and then he fires downfield against the Seahawks, and it's Justin Jefferson for that game-winning touchdown. He couldn't do any of that on Sunday night. Why? Because the entire pocket was just pushed inward. It didn't just collapse on him from one side where he could kind of maneuver. It collapsed on him completely. And I don't think everybody's going to be able to utilize that kind of strategy with that kind of blitz-heavy mechanisms. Because one of the things that the Lions have that other teams don't is they have great safeties. People talk about Kirby Joseph being dirty, which I'm going to be honest, I vehemently disagree with, because the NFL tells you to hit low because they don't want concussions. So that's an unintended consequence. But then they also have Brian Branch, who in himself he's a very physical, violent player, but they're really good at their job. And when you have corners who are a little weaker, you can just tell them, hey, go play press. We have guys behind you to help. And we're just going to live and die by it because we really don't have much of a choice. And you know what? Kudos to them. It thrived, but there were still open receivers. TJ Hawkinson was open most of the game. Darnold just couldn't hit him. Darnold couldn't hit Justin Jefferson 3 times when he was wide open in the end zone.
Oh, yeah. The red zone stuff is terrible.
Historically bad. The worst red zone performance via success rate percentage in the last 5 seasons combined. 1,328 out of 1,328.
Wow.
That's historically bad. So when you think about, okay, how can we use this to project forward? Some of it you just can't because it's historically bad. And that kind of stuff, we talk about a lot in this industry about trying to project and trying to find metrics that are sustainable. Red zone percentage is not considered very sustainable for a multitude of reasons. One, it can be very fluky. You throw 1 interception and miss 1 field goal, all of a sudden you're 0-2 and you get no points in the red zone. Considering the Vikings had less than 70 red zone possessions, that's going to drag that number considerably. 3% can knock you down from like 10th to 20th in the league. So those kind of things, like 0-4 in the red zone will not happen again. Now, are they going to go 4 for 4? I'm not going to tell you that either. They're probably going to do something like 2 for 4, 3 or 5, and be somewhat successful in the red zone. And we're talking about touchdowns. We're not talking about scoring points. Touchdowns is what you want once you get to the red area, because once you're that close, you need to be able to punch it in. They had guys open. Darnold not hitting Addison on that flat route on 4th down, and then he ended up trying to hit him in a scramble drill. You see that, you got to rip it. That you're never going to get that kind of wide open in the National Football League in the red zone. You got to grip it and rip it. He's done that all season. He did not do it on Sunday night. And that's where some of that stuff where he's pressing. And I do think that having this loss could end up being a very good thing for the Vikings. Now, this is going to be a complete glass half full kind of speech. Losing stinks. Losing is not good, but you learn way more from losses than you do from wins. And they won 9 in a row. They have not lost since October the 24th. I'll never forget the day my dad retired. And when you have that kind of loss, you have to look inward. And you mentioned earlier, Judd, the adjustments on offense. I thought Kevin O'Connell did a good job early adjusting some of those blitzes, throwing screens, getting the ball behind defenders and letting guys run with it. That Aaron Jones screen on 2nd and 27, basically on the goal line. There's a free rusher coming from the left. He lobs it right over the top. Jones gets 9 yards and sets up that almost converted 3rd and 18. We talked about the Hawkinson up the seam. But there was not enough of adjustments. They threw on a 4th and 10 with the Lions sending a cover 0 blitz, which they did 14 times by Aaron Glenn's count. 14 cover 0 blitzes. That's like Brian Flores level stuff. They're running post corners. Why are you running a post corner on a cover 0 blitz? You can't be doing that. You have to play smarter. You have to have guys go hot. Hey, I see that they're blitzing. I need to adjust my route from a post corner to a glance or a slant so I can give my quarterback an opportunity to throw it. I don't care if it's max protection. Even so, if it's max protection, that's still 7-on-7. Somebody's likely getting through with that much traffic. You have to be able to adapt and adjust. And I think at the end of the game, O'Connell did not do enough to give these guys a chance to come back. And to me, that's frustrating.
And speaking of adjustments, let's go back to like the red zone inefficiency, because what is the one big thing that maybe is glaring from the film that you've looked at, from their trips down to the red zone, that you want to say that cannot happen again? Like, is it the miscommunication? Obviously the Addison miss is massive, but when it comes to one maybe thing that stuck out to you on all 4 trips to the red zone, what's the biggest glaring issue?
Well, one, they can't run the ball. Ben Gessling posted this just like an hour ago. According to Sports Info Solutions, I think it was 72.7% of all carries are getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage, which is the worst in the National Football League. This interior cannot run block. Garrett Bradbury is great at wide zone, and I think he's a more than capable center. I don't think he's the problem, but he's definitely not a solution. I just think if you get good guards next to him, then he's more than capable. He's only making $5.25 million a year. Like, that's nothing. And especially when you see centers on like in this league getting like $15-16 million, you're more than getting your money's worth out of Bradbury. But Brandel, I wrote about this yesterday for A to Z Sports. His play has dropped off immensely since Christian Darrisaw got hurt. And you can see it on film. It's all over the place. His pass protection has just gone kablooey. And when you have great guys next to you, it helps prop up other players. Before Christian Darrisaw got hurt, in the 6 games where Darrisaw was completely healthy, Brandel allowed 6 pressures. The game he got hurt, he allowed 4. The ensuing 10 games, he's allowed 31, including a whopping 8 on Sunday night. Now, it's tough with just looking at pressure numbers to truly understand some of these things, because all pressures are not created equal, especially with this Vikings offense, because Sam Darnold has one of the highest time to throws in the league. It's 3rd in the National Football League. It's over 3 seconds. And you're asking these guys to block for a long period of time. If you allow a pressure at 4 seconds, I don't care. You blocked for 4 seconds. Good for you. That rocks. You did your job. I'm proud of you. But if you allow pressure at 1.5, that's where things completely change. That's where you have that paradigm shift. And looking at raw pressure numbers is bad process, because you have to contextualize what those pressures meant. And I wish there was a way we could kind of sort them out and be able to see that data. But with the public facing data that PFF gives us, we're not allowed to see which plays that they were charted with the pressure, how quick that pressure came. That would be able to tell us a lot more about how well they're playing. But when you look at how the offensive line is, Dalton Risner cannot get push up front. That's never been his game. It's one of the reasons I don't like him. I don't like his play style. But it's like he's been objectively fine. The improvement over Ed Ingram, that's another debate. I'm sure I'll have it about 5 more times before the end of free agency. But when you look at some of those things and how they like to play, who's going to get you that push up front? Who's Jason Kelsey? Who's Landon Dickerson? And I use the Eagles as an example because they're so good at getting that push up front. And they're just butt kickers. The tush push. Jalen Hurts can squat 600 pounds, but those dudes move people.
This is
Who
why,
are your movers?
And this is exactly why, among the places that I think this team has to look in free agency comes March, is at least one position inside there. Mm-hmm. It's imperative that you get someone who wants to kick your butt. Steve Hutchinson was signed to, at the time, the biggest contract for a guard in 2006, $49 million for 7 years.
Yep.
Why? Because Steve Hutchinson brought a bark, a bite, and a snarl to that offensive line. And the interior is not the same as the tackles. To that interior of that line that made them different. And the other thing he did, to your point about Darrisaw, in this case, it's reversed. Hutchinson made Bryant McKinney better. So, there are things right now. That Detroit game actually exposed some very interesting things, and that was one of them, is you cannot go into the red zone without a chance to have the run as a real threat, and that starts with the fact that you've got 2 guards, one of whom I don't think Dalton will be back, and more importantly, too, you do have to make a decision about Bradbury here pretty soon as well, but I think that it's now crystallized that if the Vikings are going to get to the point that O'Connell wants them, which also is a team that's tougher to play against, like he has taken steps to getting you there, I think the interior of the offensive line becomes a very, very important focal point for this team once the season's done.
I've always been on the board that guards don't matter, and by that kind of verbiage is kind of similar to running backs don't matter. Like, if you have average to above average guards, you're fine. But you can do that with Christian Darrisaw. If Darrisaw comes back next year healthy, I think Brandel will be fine. And I do wonder how Kwesi Fomensa will approach the interior of the offensive line, because now he's going to have full reign. Now he's going to have cap space. This is when you're really going to see a lot of that vision with how he wants to build this team. $72 million in dead cap right now. You have to find wins on the margins. You have to find spots where you're going to have value. Where is that going to be? Where are you taking those risks? The Vikings took those risks on the interior of the offensive line. They bet that Ed Ingram would take a year 3 leap, which I think he did, but they decided it wasn't good enough. I think that's a fine decision. Garrett Bradbury, who is a capable enough center, and Blake Brandel, 3-year, $9.5 million contract. We think he can be a good guard, and he was for a while, but then he showed some struggles. And that happens when you get a lot of tape on a guy. Hey, I know how to beat him because he's 6'7". So how are you going to then evolve from there? No, $76 million in cap space. Do they throw the book at Trey Smith and just decide, hey, now my only true weakness is going to be left guard, and he's fine with Christian Darrisaw there? Like, you can't have 5 guys making market level money. That's just not how this league works. And you have to find like your razor thin edges, and you have to find winning on the margins. You have to make positive bets. Grenard, Cashman, Van Ginkel, they prioritize those guys over left guard and right guard. And it's very difficult to say that they were wrong. They were right, because all 3 of those guys were incredible hits. Van Ginkel and Grenard are both starters in the Pro Bowl. And I'd argue that Cashman should have been brought to the Pro Bowl, but that's based on how the Pro Bowl does their rosters, because they only have 2 spots for inside linebackers, which is a joke. But that's a whole nother story. You have to find your wins. And now that he's got money, will the interior offensive line be that? Because I think if you bring in Trey Smith, whether or not it's Darnold or McCarthy, that's huge for this team. That's huge for securing the run game. That's huge for pass protection. It's just huge in general. Like, this is going to be such a fascinating offseason for that reason. And Judd, I think the exposure of some of these issues that you mentioned, coaching only fills talent gaps for so long. And there's still major talent gaps on this roster. And the fact that this roster is 14-3 is still remarkable, even if it feels crummy that they lost on Sunday night to the Lions.
Looking ahead here, Forno, what's give me one thing, whether it's on the offensive side or defensive side of the ball, for this game Monday night against the Rams. Mm-hmm. You already kind of know them. You saw them earlier this season, but they've arguably, you could say, they've gotten a lot better since that meeting. What's the one thing the Vikings need to work on and really focus on, whether it's defense or offense, before Monday night?
So I don't know if you guys caught this, but right before we started recording, Brian Flores admitted that they had no idea Puka was going to play until 4 hours before the game. So they didn't game plan for him at all. Okay. And it's inarguable that they have a completely different offense with Puka Nacua in there than when they don't. Now they're going to have a full week to prepare. Hey, Puka's playing. We know he's playing. We're going to be ready for it. And I think that matters. Now, we can criticize Brian Flores for that, but nobody in the world thought Puka was going to play. Nobody. And then all of a sudden, because it's a Thursday night game, because they don't have to do the inactives or the elevations and that kind of stuff until 3 p.m. Central Time the day of, the Vikings didn't know either. So now you have this situation where they're going to prepare for him. And I think they will be much better prepared for what that team is going to bring to the table with Puka Nacua. And I think that's an important element. The other factor is just execute. You watch that game on Sunday. I implore everybody all the time on my show, go get NFL Plus, go watch the All 22, even if you don't know everything that you're looking at, because it can be intimidating. It was for me for a long time. Watch how open these receivers are getting and watch how they're missed. Watch how Darnold just does not fire when all season long he's been firing in tight windows. That throw in the Bears game where Jefferson's just running the dig route and he just sails it right past that linebacker's ear, and it was one of the best throws we saw all year. He did that all season. He just didn't do it against the Lions. So in that sense, what are you going to believe is going to be the case? Is he going to just turtle again like he did against the Lions? Or is he going to play like he did for 16 other games? I'm going to take the version we saw for 16 games rather than like kind of the 1 game sample size, because it's like I think they're going to learn a lot from this game. They're going to be better for it. And that theory where, hey, you just learn a lot from your losses and you need to kind of fix some of these things, that might take them to another level. That might be the propeller to get them that Super Bowl run. And that feels like a far cry. That feels like, way too optimistic. But those things can happen where you get that wake-up call and then all of a sudden you go on that run. They've already won 5 games and 9 games. Now they just have to win 4. They're going to be a lot harder, but it's possible.
Age questions?
Yeah, first one here comes from Martin Vulu on YouTube. He says, the real problem is not only our inability to run the ball in the red zone, goal line, short yardage situations, but it's the inability to commit to the run game when the pass isn't there, and that is philosophical. That is entirely on KOC to change how his offense functions. What I'll kind of spin this off of is, do you agree, and how important is it to establish the run early against the Rams on Monday night?
I don't think it's that important to establish the run.
Okay.
I don't think they should ignore it. One of the reasons why the Vikings don't run the football is Kevin O'Connell just doesn't trust it. And how much of a reason has this running game given you a reason to trust it consistently? Just hasn't. And one of the things to also understand, because we'll talk a lot about like run pass ratios and splits and how often Sam Darnold is dropping back. Screen passes are runs. It's just a modern day run. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of group some of those things in there. Just figure out your game plan, execute the game plan, and be good at what you do. If you want to run the ball 40 times and you're really good at it and you run for 200 yards, that's great. You want to throw it 50 times and you throw for 400 yards, that's great. Just whatever you need to do to win the game, do it. I would love for them to establish the run, get Aaron Jones 5 yards a pop, and then just continue to get 2nd and 4s all game long. That would be ideal, because then, hey, guess what? 2nd and 4, play action deep shot. Let's try and get a chunk. And they're really good at getting those chunks. Sam Darnold finished the season, I believe, 1st overall with 32 completions where the ball was in the air 20-plus yards down the field. Find a way to be successful and keep doing it and be relentless with it. If they can do that, whatever that is, I think that's how they win the game. I hope they can get the run game established, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if they don't get it established, they won't beat the Rams. It's in SoFi. It's not going to be a weather game. So you can do whatever you want. You can throw the ball all over the field and get away with it.
Second one comes here from Andy Larson. He says, KOC gets all the credit when Darnold plays well, but none of the blame when Darnold stinks. KOC and Darnold were both awful on Sunday night. KOC made no adjustments. The game did show us that Darnold is not the guy, but we should also be worried about KOC ever leading this team to a Super Bowl. No adjustments were seen. Do you agree that there were no adjustments? Who should take more of the blame, and what sort of adjustments would you have liked to see, especially in the second half when it seemed like they just needed to get something going but couldn't?
I've got a lot of thoughts on this, but Judd, I would like to hear your thoughts. What did you think of KC's in-game coaching and how he made some of those adjustments?
I thought he could have made more. Here's the problem. There's no way he could have foreseen Darnold melting down that bad. And I think he thought he would come out of it. And so, like, KO wants to take shots. And so could he and should he have gone away from that? Perhaps, yes. But I think we also just saw, and I think KO looked shook post-game because of this. The meltdown was so complete. And not being able to trust the run game is a major problem, but that is, and I'll continue to hammer this home. I love the guy. Aaron Jones is a great locker room guy. When he's healthy, he's a good player. Yeah. But the Aaron Jones experience and the reason why the Packers moved on is this. So there were periods again on Sunday where he couldn't play. He was in the locker room at the beginning of the third quarter. He can't be used as much. But I think the fact that Darnold so thoroughly melted down through KO for a loop because it had been so long. And the last time he did it was Jacksonville, and that's Jacksonville, and you still won. I'm not excusing KO, but I am saying I think it startled everybody.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I do think early on in that game, he was making some good adjustments. But one of the interesting things you kind of mentioned, he just thought Darnold would come out of it. Like, go look back at the Indianapolis Colts game. Just, they laid a complete egg in the first half. They come out, Darnold leads, I think it was 3 straight touchdown drives to start the second half, and he snapped out of it real quick. And he's done that a lot this year, where he's kind of struggled early and then come out of it and then just ripped a bunch of great drives together. So theoretically, he's already shown you historical precedent that he can do that. So then when he didn't, that kind of not necessarily throws you into a panic, but I don't really have a better way to describe it. It's just kind of like, okay, what do we do now? Because it's just not working. I don't think putting in Nick Mullins would have worked. You just kind of have to work through it with Darnold. And look, there was stuff open, and Darnold was making the right reads. And it was what we talked about in the Jacksonville game. His process was good. He just wasn't making the throws. You have to make the throws. That's part of the game. Yeah. But when the process is good and you're just missing, the hope is that's just going to correct itself. And it just didn't on Sunday. And that's that's the number one reason why this team lost. Darnold just couldn't hit the stuff that was there, and he recognized.
Yep, exactly right. Exactly right. And at least the process didn't result in, I believe it was 3 picks against Jacksonville. So that's the one good thing, is the passes were so high, nobody could pick them off, and that's a small thing. All right, Forno, great stuff. We will talk to you we'll probably talk to you on Wednesday next week, because it's a Monday night game against the Rams. And of course the film won't come in until Tuesday in that case. AJ, Judd, Forno, Purple Daily, meat and potatoes.